And there it is. So we will get going. The agenda that we sent out to all of you starts with, will we have a budget by the time of the briefing? Well, I guess that depends on how you define budget. The answer to that question does. You probably all know that we have law that went into effect without the governor's signature because it is it's a budget. Certainly an expense statement. It's a spending plan, and it's revenue to cover most of the spending, but not all. We have about a $1.3 billion gap. And so negotiations are still underway as to how that gap is going to be filled. Of course, the state constitution requires a balanced budget, and anyway, it generally makes sense to to have revenue to pay for your work. Here it is, an article from today's Philly paper. So it looks like there is some general agreement on increasing cigarette tax by $1 a pack, and also imposing a wholesale tax on smokeless tobacco and electronic cigarettes, which have been exempt. I'm not familiar with the whole system of wholesale taxes versus retail taxes, so I don't know what one pays when one walks into a store to buy smokeless tobacco. Presumably there's a tax on that already. We will continue to be one of two states that exempts cigar manufacture from wholesale taxes. Apparently the other state is Florida, and legislators are afraid that our cigar companies will move to Florida if we tax them. But we're looking at, again, cigarette tax and wholesale taxes on smokeless tobaccos and e-cigarettes. We're looking at, it says negotiators have settled on imposing 6% sales tax on digital downloads, including music, movies, books, and apps. There has been talk, particularly among House Republicans, about expanding gambling, legalizing online gambling. I'm not sure how far that's going to go. But apparently the holdup in the negotiations at this point is not so much a budget item, although I think tangentially related to the budget, and that is the school code. Issues around charter schools, capping the number of students who can go into charter schools, and I'm sure there's a budgetary impact there. It's a big issue in Philadelphia, but probably elsewhere in the state as well. So that's what I know about the budget. All this week, the House came back in on Sunday. I don't remember. I think the Senate came on Monday. They've been working Monday, Tuesday. They went into session at 9 o'clock this morning, which is very unusual. They still leadership keeps putting out a message about being close and hoping to get it done. I was at the Capitol yesterday, and both a Senate staffer and a Republican staffer told me they were they were hearing a likelihood that they were just going to go home. That is, the legislature would recess at the end of today, regardless of what happens. So don't know about that. At any rate, we don't yet have a full funding plan. Revenue does continue to come into the state, and I am assuming, I'm not a legal expert on how this all works, but I'm assuming that since Wolf did let the spending plan become law, that they can now they can now spend the money that is coming in, but at some point in the future we will run out of money, and either cuts will be made, as we saw several years back, or hopefully in the meantime, in the near future, they'll come up with some revenue. So I had intended to open up this portion of the conversation with the famous quote, "It's deja vu all over again." This is unfortunately becoming the new normal in Pennsylvania. but hopefully this year we'll wrap it up sooner than last year. Being the eternal optimist that I am. Of course, it is an election year, which tends to change the dynamics a little bit. They don't want to go into an election without the budget being resolved. So I'm expecting we'll see something happening sooner than March. We have on the line with us Ann Gingrich from Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations, who watches the issue of the budget and lack of funding very carefully, particularly as it impacts nonprofit organizations around the state. Ann, do you want to tell us what you're seeing and what you saw last year, and where the concerns are?
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. Thank you for having me join. For those of you who don't know, the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations is an organization that has nonprofit members of every type. So we have housing, we have health and human services of all kinds, education, animal support organizations. So we're pretty broad in the issues that we look at, which I think it can both be a good thing, but also can be challenging when you're looking at different line items in the budget. We partnered with the United Way of Pennsylvania and Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership on some surveys early, and the Housing Alliance on surveys early last year, and looking at what the impact of the budget impact had. In November, we did the Stand for Pennsylvanians Day, which we partnered with the Housing Alliance on, which was great. And then towards the end of the budget impasse, PANO really felt like we needed to get, we did the early surveys, but what did the actual impact have? Because we can all talk about what we think the impact might be, but what was it actually like? So we did a survey end of March, early April, and came out with a smaller sample than we were hoping for, but the story that came from that sample was pretty compelling. And I'll just give some big numbers, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what we have done with those since. So we had 176 participants. Only 22 organizations reported having to actually close their doors or reduce services, but those 22 organizations impacted over 17,000 clients. So I say that because I feel like if we can figure out how to come together as a nonprofit sector, the numbers that we bring collectively to the table can really have a significant impact if we can figure out what that common language is. Another number, which I just learned, which I think is kind of awesome, is that the nonprofit sector in Pennsylvania employs 727,000 employees, or 15% of the workforce. So as I talk through some of what we've done, I say that within the context of, I think if we can continue to collectively figure out what we can agree on, we can really, frankly, rock Pennsylvania in really cool ways, in more ways than what we already are. So we went through and we did the survey. I talked about the number of clients that were impacted. 135 organizations borrowed $172 million to continue operations. So if you multiply that by the thousands of nonprofits that get state or government contracts, that collective borrowing is pretty significant. And then, so the ongoing impact is both which organizations are still dealing with right now, is that interest still needs to be paid back. So that $172 million, there's interest payments that go with that. So organizations are heading into this current fiscal year with that debt. 18% of our survey respondents reported having a negative credit rating. So, even if they or if they have to borrow money, it's going to come to them at a higher rate if they get approved at all for credit. So, and that credit rating, of course, as you know, will follow through for years to come for those organizations. So I think the impact of 1 year of a budget impasse is pretty significant. We took this data, we met with leadership on both sides of the House and the Senate and the governor's office, and our three requests which were well received by and I should say well received. No one even rolled their eyes at us. But the 3 requests that we had were, the one is obvious, please pass an on-time budget, please. Establish, and then the second one has to do with the ongoing impact of the last year's impasse, which is we asked for them to establish and fund an interest reimbursement program. And that concept was picked up by Representative DiGirolamo a little bit later in the process. I don't think it went anywhere, but that was something we were asking for. And then another obvious one is to increase funding for organizations that provide mandated service. So those were our 3 asks. We were fairly well received with that. The story of the impasse got picked up by a lot of media outlets, both in-state and out-of-state, including the Washington Post, which I think that the media were really looking for the impact of how this impacted the nonprofit sector, because we as a group were significantly impacted by this. And again, I just want to say, I think collectively we have a pretty big story to tell. And PANO, and I'm delighted to be able to say this, PANO's board is really eager now to step up and find that collective voice and speak up on behalf of the sector in ways we maybe haven't done so much in the past. And it's not that we weren't supportive, but we're a little shy. And the board is not as shy anymore. So we are interested in hearing from any organizations that would like to partner with us. We are all about figuring out what that common language is. And so with that in mind, I think the Housing Alliance has a link on their website for a survey that we're conducting now to find out how many organizations around the state would be willing to support various tax increases, many of which Cindy has already mentioned earlier in this call. And we would be interested in knowing from all of you as well. So if you can go in there and say yes, no, or yes, maybe with board approval, which are the 3 options, it would help us to say, okay, so we, can talk about the nonprofit sector from the small sample at least and say whether or not there'd be some support. I think I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions or comments.
I just have a comment. I'm flabbergasted. $172 million that's just an amazing number.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I missed that, but sorry, Cindy, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm okay. Holy smokes.
Yeah, and that was just from just a little over 100 organizations. So if you multiply those numbers out, you're going to have a much larger number than that.
Yeah, that is pretty significant. And it also speaks to how big a part of the economy the nonprofit sector is. Mm-hmm. If that figure was borrowed just to keep afloat, just to fill gaps for just those 135 organizations, as you say, multiply it out and look at, actually, do you have numbers, or maybe it would be good to collect numbers on the total budgets for the nonprofit, even the nonprofit human services sector? It would be good for us to look at. But I think, you're focusing on the also the dollar impact maybe of those organizations that closed, and mm-hmm. maybe we need to look at the employment losses, jobs lost, and that sort of thing.
I can jump in. And so we did ask the question about employees. So let me just find the right, where is it at? There was 382 employees who were laid off, their hours were reduced, or they quit. I mean, there were some employees, long-term employees that just quit because they were sick of working in an unstable environment. But it affected 382 positions, full-time equivalent positions, from only 86 organizations. So again, if you multiply those numbers across other organizations, the employment, the challenge to the employers and employees was pretty significant.
Yeah.
And I will also say the anecdotal information that came in with that survey really spoke to the stress that employers had. And we had hosted some weekly advocacy calls throughout the fall, and that was the issue that people came to the calls with so much stress and anxiety around what to do with employees. And so I think, again, we employ 15% of Pennsylvania's workforce. We partner with government to do their mandated services, and so we need to hold our heads up high as we go to the table and negotiate for our own well-being.
Absolutely. And I'd like to hear, well, first I'm going to stop talking and let people ask questions, but also hear from organizations on the call as to whether they were impacted last year and what their concerns are going forward. And then also, Anne, if we have, maybe we can brainstorm a little bit about some specifics that we might like folks to do now, certainly outreach to your legislators, but also in terms of organizing. So star 7 to unmute your lines if you have some comments or questions.
Cindy, this is Jeff from Silk. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jeff.
Hi. We used, I say Silk, and I think some of the Centers for Independent Living did this too. We mentioned the House hearing that Rep. DiGirolamo did and mentioned Pano. I would say probably less than half the staffers or members we met with were aware of it. Some were definitely aware of it. The issue in general was fresh in everyone's mind, but I think it's something to keep using. And we also used some information from Centers for Independent Living, like we had some CILs that had taken out lines of credit, or some of the programs were impacted, and like programs that we send folks to, like on the county level, or folks were waiting for home modifications, some of the money for like nursing home transition, it was state-only dollars, things like that. We used that in our advocacy. We could probably share some of that information with you in the future, but I think Rep. DiGirolamo's hearing, I think, was helpful, and probably just need to keep reminding legislators and the governor about the impacts of those, because I think a lot of it is public education. I mean, there's a lot more awareness of that, of their issues. It was talked more about by the media, and nonprofits got some hits, but not as much. So.
Very, very helpful. As you're talking, I'm thinking about outreach to the legislature, using that data in a letter that goes to all legislators, maybe even a sign-on letter or something like that. Other comments? Questions?
Hi, it's Colleen. I was just wondering, what were the specific organizations that were impacted the most? Like, did you survey and gather what nonprofits and like what services were impacted the most by a late budget?
We did. Health and Human Services came out really strong in that, but the organizations that participated included libraries, which was an interesting little group that popped up, some historic preservation trust, museum type organizations, smaller percentages of those, but and then there was a pretty significant portion of nonprofits that provide educational services as well.
And any other thoughts about how can what do I want to say? I know you mentioned last year there were phone calls, organizational calls, trying different statewide organizations or organizations around the state trying to come together on that. Is that something that that is underway again yet, or sort of waiting to see what's happening?
I would say for that, waiting to see what's happening, but I actually want to respond to something that I think it was Jeff who just mentioned, using some data for talking to legislators. One of the things that's been on my plate, and I just haven't, frankly, had the time to do it yet, is the idea of taking some of the data that we gathered from the last year, which we did intentionally so we could use moving forward, and putting that into some toolkits. So sample press releases if you want those, sample letters to the legislators, and sample fundraising, and this is an interesting one, fundraising materials perhaps, ways you can use it to inform your donors, and possibly some language to use for board training. So if I would be interested in knowing if that would be useful to people on the call. We really have, our mission and our goal is to help support the work that's out there, and we would be happy to put together a toolkit, and in fact started working on it. We just haven't gotten it done yet.
Anyone on the call want to respond to that? Sounds great to me. Joyce, I know that we either have or are about to link the current survey that Ann was talking about. Do we have the data from last year's survey on our website?
I don't know. I have to ask Tori's not on. I'll double check with her. But Ann, I know you work closely with Tori. Can you send us that info and?
Yeah, we have, we have a link on our website as well. So, but yes, I'd be happy to send that to you. The full report is on PANO's website.
Okay, and I think that I think we haven't gotten the new survey up yet, but we'll be doing that within a couple days. So.
And even if you just send us the link from last year, link to your website, we can get that in our newsletter and onto our website.
Yeah, I think that if there's some brief thing that has what you said, how much money it's been, how many have been affected, that piece, I think would be good.
I'll send the link. We have a link to the executive summary and then also a link to the full report.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on the budget? Okay. Well,
I have one question.
Yes.
And maybe it's a little off, but I've heard news reports, and I'm just wondering if there's any truth to it, that there's some Republican legislators who are threatening to sue the governor over the budget because he failed to line item veto it down to the revenue available.
Isn't that ironic?
Yes. It's their budget, and then they threaten to sue it over the fact that the governor is not vetoing it.
Right. Not vetoing the bill that they sent them. I sent him. I heard the same stories. We'll see. Yes, Pennsylvania is required to have a balanced budget. I haven't opened my copy of the Constitution since this all started. I heard a response from the Wolf administration that the Constitution places the responsibility on the legislature. I suspect that everybody bears some responsibility. But, yeah, that's an interesting approach. We'll send over a bill that is not constitutional and then sue the governor for letting it become law. I should stop commenting at that point.
Just saying.
Yeah, just saying. Welcome to Pennsylvania.
Hey, you could be in Illinois.
That's true. They don't have last year's budget yet.
They can't even pay the lottery winners.
I also think it's so emblematic of the whole way we're handling the budget situation that they want to fund the budget with expanded gambling. So on to Blight. We let's see. I've got two bills. Oh no, what do I have? Yeah, a couple bills listed here that got some positive news on. House Bills 1500 and 1501 both deal with land banks and homelessness. Basically, 1500 makes recommendations that land banks use some of their property for addressing homelessness, for housing people who are homeless. And 1501 had initially expanded the Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit program with some additional funds that could be directed to homeless housing assistance, specifically in land bank jurisdictions. Now, I know that I'm looking through the bill right now, the increase in funding was deleted, which, of course, ties back to our previous conversation about the budget. So we're not increasing funding for programs at the moment, which reminds me, I forgot to talk about housing programs, and I will in just a second. But it does still, so this is House Bill 1501, does still reference homeless assistance programs in land bank jurisdictions as eligible activities under the Neighborhood Assistance Program. Now, I know that NAP has been used for housing programs for a while, and I believe that this year DCED has made housing for vulnerable populations as special programs priority. So that is all very good. House Bill 1500 was amended to add language that will exempt the real estate transactions of a land bank from realty transfer tax, making it a little bit more economical for land banks to operate and to acquire and dispose of real estate. So that's something that the land banks across the state, and we now have 13, are happy about. And that bill, it's a House bill that passed the House. It was in the Senate. It was amended in the Senate. So assuming that that gets a final vote in the Senate one of these days soon, it will go back to the House for concurrence. And it was language that was originally proposed, that is the amendment language on the realty transfer tax exemption, was initially proposed by a representative in the House, and so I'm hoping, and we will work to make sure that concurrence vote happens on that, and we get that one done. I did want to backtrack for just a minute to the budget and say that the few line items that we track, because there's very little money in the state budget for housing, homeless assistance program at Department of Human Services and the Human Services Development Fund, not the block grant, but the line item fund, are level funded, and I am looking for my budget chart to say exactly what that is. But level funded at $18.5 million for homeless assistance, $13.5 in round numbers for the HSDF fund. The Keystone Communities is at DCED, and that is a program consolidated former line items that fund Elm Street, Main Street, Keystone Opportunity Zone, along with accessible housing for home modifications and some redevelopment assistance, community development assistance, to the extent that you can do much of any of that with $6 million. The current year's funding of $6.3 million. The budget that was just passed, and I'm looking at the wrong chart here, but increased that to about $10 million, I believe it was. The question that's yet to be answered, or that I don't know the answer to, is whether any of that money was designated, because sometimes what they'll do is they'll increase the funding, but then in another bill that's called the Fiscal Code, it gives specific directions, like $500,000 will go to a city of the third class with a population between, whatever, 40,000 and 45,000 people, and so it's specifically directed. That has happened in the past. I'm not sure whether that will be happening with this money or not, but there is at least a small increase for Keystone Communities. So that's what we know about housing and community development in the budget. But getting back to the Blight bill, so there is some progress on House Bills 1500. 1501 has not yet passed the House, but 1500 has passed, and as I said, is working its way through the Senate. Any questions about that, I did not actually explain land banks. I'm not sure if anybody, if folks on the call may or may not be familiar. These are quasi-governmental entities that address vacant and blighted property, acquire property, and deal with it. So any questions about those two bills? Star 7 to unmute.
Cindy, it's Joyce. I just wanted to, before we, and I'm not sure if that's next, move on to the federal stuff, if I could say something about state work.
Yeah, let me do one more blight thing, and then let's move on to, you can do that. We have also talked at length over the last decade or so about our clear title bill. I have a little bit of a typo here in the announcement. House Bill 773. Which would allow folks who have been living in a home for 10 years or more but don't have actual title to the house to petition the court for title under certain circumstances. And basically it's a situation where the owner of record has disappeared or died. Often starts as a landlord-tenant situation, and the landlord dies or moves out of state or out of the country, and nobody's maintaining the property except the family that stays there and tries to maintain it. But because they don't have title, they can't get a home improvement loan or grant, sometimes can't enter into a repayment agreement for back taxes. So they end up abandoning the property, which becomes blighted and which has a title problem because the owner's not around to sign a deed. And so under current law, the occupant would have to wait 21 years to claim title, and that's known as adverse possession. Pennsylvania is 21 years, but that's a long time to wait when your roof is leaking. And so this sets up a process after 10 years after the owner of record has disappeared, and allows for the occupant, the resident, to file for title. The bill, as in previous sessions, has passed the House and is in the Senate. And for about a year it was in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm happy to say it moved out of Judiciary a few weeks ago, and we are very much hoping for a vote on the floor of the Senate. It did have a technical amendment to take out some duplicative language, and so it does have to go back to the House, but again, there is overwhelming support for it in the House. There are actually very few legislative days yet left, this being an election year, so they will reconvene after Labor Day, assuming they leave this summer. They will reconvene after Labor Day, but generally there are not a lot of session days in September or October, but there will be enough to get this done. If this is an issue that means something to you, first of all, I'd like to hear from you, and second of all, please contact your state senator. So I'll open it to questions on any of the blight bills or any other blight issue, and then ask Joyce to give her part. Any questions? Star 7. Okay, Joyce?
Thanks, everyone. Just a little update, and I think some of the people on the call probably joined us in Harrisburg on June 15th for Home Matters Day. The Housing Alliance and some of the folks on this call participated. I think Joe Willard from PEC participated in this. The legislature commissioned the Joint State Government Commission to do a report on findings and recommendations around preventing and ending homelessness in Pennsylvania, and they released the report. Very comprehensive, a lot of great information in it, great recommendations. And the Housing Alliance and HAPN and its members are advocating with the governor's office to do 4 things. One is a real interagency council on homelessness chaired by, with the backing of the governor, a real interagency plan on ending and preventing homelessness, sort of a homeless czar, someone with cabinet-level authority to ensure that things are moving, and I think there's a 4th, but I can't remember what it is. But anyway, we met with the governor's office. We're really pleased by the reaction we got. There's a woman, Meg, I'll just name her Meg Sneed, who works in the policy office, is an advocate for this issue and works on policy. Obviously, given the budget work, they're concentrating on that. But we brought this issue to them and hope that, and want to urge the governor to implement these things. The sort of next step in that is the Housing Alliance and its members and people on the call are going to go to the governor's local offices. Erie, I think Diana Ames is on the phone. We're going to have one in Pittsburgh, Scranton, and Philadelphia. So anyways, over the probably 2 weeks out, we'll be planning and we'll be going and doing these meetings with the governor's representatives in those 4 regions. So I just wanted to open the invite to folks on the call. You can email me. You can call our office. You can let Cindy know. But they're open to anyone who wants to talk about, the great work that's being done around Pennsylvania on preventing and ending homelessness, and really urging him to put the support and his backing behind really, getting everyone to work collectively on this issue. So I don't know if anyone has questions on that.
Questions for Joyce on the homelessness report or advocacy for the Interagency Council and plan and such?
And then, if I could, I know Cindy's going to jump into the federal piece. The Housing Alliance, in sort of conjunction with the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference, happily goes to D.C. every July and educates and advocates with our federal members of the Senate and House, and we are going on July 28th. It's open to anyone who's a member or interested in going and talking about the lack of affordable housing, homelessness, community development. So, again, if anyone wants to come for the day or if you're going to the conference and you want to participate, you're welcome. So, again, just email me or Cindy, and we'll get you, with both of these meetings, the state ones and the federal, we will have a planning call so everyone will be, briefed and know what the plan for the meetings are. So, again, thanks, Cindy.
Sure. Thank you, Joyce. And thanks for bringing those things up. That very important. And as we transition now into talking about the federal, I do not have the federal budget on the agenda because we have talked about that on previous calls. So there's nothing really new to report, but I do want to remind people that it is still budget season. And the House and Senate have passed their respective, or I guess one of them passed, the other committee passed their respective budget bills. Senate's generally a little better than the House, but both of them are a little better than last year. Again, we are going into the second year of a 2-year agreement to raise the spending caps. The Budget Control Act had imposed limits on how much can be spent and forced cuts known as sequestration in order to stay within those limits. There was a 2-year agreement to raise the caps and suspend those cuts, the sequestration cuts. We're in currently FY16 is year 1, FY17 that will start October 1st is year 2. And so this budget is really important that we get some increased levels of funding for HUD and USDA housing programs. And I don't know what will happen going forward, but it's an important year. So Congress is generally in session in July and recess is in August, but of course the conventions start next week, and so I'm sure that they're on recess. I haven't checked the schedule. I'm sure they're on recess for the conventions. But that's a good time to find, after the conventions, it's a good time to find the senators and the state reps or the U.S. reps back in the districts, and of course their staff is always accessible. Make sure they know what your programs are doing. I think that often our legislators don't see how the money is used in the communities, that they look at thousands of line items on a page, and they're tasked with the job of making everything add up. But they don't have an opportunity, or they don't often or always know what those numbers translate into back home. So it's our job to get them out. Get their staff out, come to visit your programs, come to meet the people you work with, come to tour your apartments if you own property. Let them see how important programs like Community Development Block Grant or Home or McKinney-Vento or anything else that you use. I don't know if we have housing authorities on the phone, but obviously the public housing, the housing choice vouchers, and the USDA programs are really, really essential to not only keeping people housed, but keeping people healthy and functioning in society. So use this time over the summer to get in touch with your congresspeople and the senators and join us in some visits. And with that, I don't know, does anybody want to have any comments on the federal budget before we move on?
Just to pile on what you were saying for 1 second, Trey. I know that, for instance, Larry Swanson and others have also used the argument that we're not, with the Republicans, that we're not just helping poor people. We're securing neighborhoods. We're providing jobs. All the construction and and these buildings pay taxes. And look, even your communities. Let's take a ride around. Let's look at your communities. Your communities need this.
Yeah, absolutely. There is that economic.
Too many times they'll just say our communities don't need it. There's no, the problems are in the city, not where we are. But just take a ride around. You'll see, or look at the data, and you'll see.
Thank you, Ray. Very important. Thanks.
Yeah, this is Jeff from Pennsylvania Silk. Some of us are, some of the Centers for Independent Living in Silk are going to be in D.C. the same week as the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference, and our Hill Day is going to be on the 26th, and housing is going to be one of the issues, and we talk about in terms of affordable and accessible and integrated, and just about if you have accessible housing, it'll keep folks from going into nursing homes and other institutional settings, which is a lot more cost-effective than folks going into nursing homes or institutions. I mean, people are more empowered to work and do things like that. I mean, we tend to approach the housing that way, but some of the programs you mentioned, CDBG is a big one. A lot of that money is also used for curb cuts as a partnership through DCED and PennDOT in Pennsylvania. We also have the Section 202 for seniors and the Section 811 programs for people with disabilities, and also the Fair Housing Dollars, which housing discrimination, about half of the housing discrimination complaints are related in some form or another to disability. So those are some of the things that we watch, as well as housing vouchers.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Okay, let me touch on a couple of other pieces of legislation on the federal level that we think are important. The first one, with two bill numbers, H.R. 3700 and S. 3083, is the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act, HOTMA. And this is a consensus bill. Consensus not only in the sense that it's bipartisan, and in fact H.R. 3700 passed the House of Representatives unanimously, which doesn't happen very often, but also consensus among tenants advocates and the housing authorities and the industry associations. It's something that has been worked on for quite a few years, and we're happy to see it moving. It does small things to make it easier to administer a program. It changes the way income and rent are calculated, but again, in a way that was negotiated by both sides so that it doesn't have substantial impact on the residents, but does make it easier to carry out the program administratively. things, again, relating to inspections of properties, so that while a property needs to be inspected before a voucher is issued, if that property has already been inspected under another program, tax credit program or home or something like that, there's no reason to duplicate. So it allows for that administrative streamlining. It allows some fungibility of funds for housing authorities. So there are some important steps moving forward, and we are working with Senator Casey's and Toomey's offices to try to get this through the Senate. So just recently, Senate Bill 3083, same bill was introduced. We'd like to get both of our senators on as sponsors and get this thing done this year. Again, your help is appreciated. And let me just also talk about the low-income housing tax credit bill, and then I'll open it up for questions on either. This bill, Senate 2962, would expand the low-income housing tax credit program by basically doubling the amount of credits available over a 5-year period. I mean, go on beyond the 5 years, but gradually increase the number of credits available until they've been doubled, and then also makes some technical changes, fixing the 9% credit and allowing for income averaging throughout the development, so that while now all assisted units have to meet 50 or 60% of area median income, be affordable to folks that this would allow that to go up to 80% as long as the average of all assisted units stays below 60% of area median income, which means that more units would be targeted to extremely low. So rather than almost all of them being right in the center there, more income mix and more reaching down to lower income folks, as well as some of the more moderate income. So again, we are particularly interested in getting Senator Toomey on board, although obviously Senator Casey's support would be good. Right now there are 8 sponsors, the prime sponsor, Senator Cantwell, and 7 co-sponsors. It's a bipartisan list. Toomey's particularly important because he is on the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. So anyone interested in working on that, let me know. We sent a letter recently and can happily send that to any of you if you want to do a similar letter to try to get the senators on board. I know we have a few people on the phone who utilize tax credits and are probably interested in that. If you have any comments, I'm happy to turn the phone over to you. So open it up for questions and comments on the federal stuff. *7 to unmute.
It's Ray. I hate to keep talking, but
please.
Maybe I wasn't listening carefully enough. But what about extending, or has it already been made permanent? The 9% remaining fixed at 9%, and are they talking about fixing 4% at 4%?
I think 4% was done last year, if I'm not mistaken. The 9% would be part of this new legislation.
I thought 9%.
I think it's the opposite.
The other way around?
Yes, backwards.
Yeah.
I got it backwards. Okay, I'm glad you all are on the phone. So the 9% was done last year, and this would fix the 4%.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
Yeah, okay.
This is Mike.
That averaging is really an interesting proposition.
Yeah.
This is Mike with the Developers Council. We sent a letter to Senator Toomey. We actually had a board call this morning, and to the extent that anybody has an interest, we're going to try to set up some grassroots meetings with members of Congress, with Senator Toomey's office. From what I'm understanding, to Congressman Meehan is going to be key as part of this conversation moves forward, and the likelihood is going to be taken up in overall tax reform if something gets done next session. But again, we're going to be out there trying to continue the discussion for the rest of the year, setting up meetings. So if anybody has an interest, I'm happy to work with them on including them in our meetings.
Thanks, Mike. And people can contact me, and I can put you in touch with Mike.
This is Jeff from Silk again. Is there any discussion related to raising the minimum amount of accessible units for states under the low-income housing tax credit, or at least having a threshold?
I have not heard that, Jeff. It's a very interesting question. So something to include in the advocacy. I know that in the past, and I'm going back years in my memory, so again, people on the phone, please correct me if I misstate something. But as I recall, one of the issues with accessible units was that they were too expensive, basically, for people on SSDI, and so some of them, a lot of them were going unused. I'm wondering if tied in with the income averaging, if that would help. But has that issue been resolved at all?
I don't think it has been. And I think some of it goes back to hitting folks that are very low income, which is a whole nother threshold to make which makes the case that you were talking about with those folks not being able to afford those units.
Well, the extremely low income, 20%, most projects have that now. And I've heard, I don't know the truth or not the untruth, but I've heard advocates a number of times saying that, and my clients who do this, saying, there are plenty of developers out there who don't even try to market those units and simply, sit there and say, well, we just can't find anybody, so we're just going to rent them to people that aren't handicapped.
Okay, so you're saying that most of your clients do now have some units at 20%, for 20% of area median.
Oh, yeah, they're all doing everything. All the new applications I've seen from my clients have units set aside for 20%. And those units usually are marketed primarily to people that need the accessible units. But the other thing is, doing some real marketing of those accessible units to people that need them, rather than sitting around waiting for them to show up.
Yeah. So Ray, if all of the developments these days, the newly approved ones, have 20% units, and for people who don't do tax credits, that would be apartments that are affordable to people at 20% of area median income or below, which is very low, which would probably be about $15,000 a year.
It's called extremely low, yeah.
Yeah. That kind of begs
very low
the question,
is 50%.
Well, very low, extremely low, 30% I think is extremely low. So it kind of begs the question of income averaging. Why would we need to do income averaging if developments already are targeting extremely low? It seems like all it would do really would be to bring in more upper income, low income.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think probably they'd make the argument that it makes them more marketable, it makes them better investment, and gives you more flexibility to bring in more people that are somewhere between 20 and 50%, because most of the units you have to be earning 50% of area median income to be able to afford them. So if you have some 80% people in there, you can rent to more people with 30 and 40.
Yeah. But then
I haven't seen the numbers run, but it makes some sense.
It does, and then the bill also says, though, that as long as the average is below 60% area median income. So, I'd have to see whether that would actually provide more extremely low income units in Pennsylvania anyway. Okay.
This is Jeff. A lot of folks that tend to get it, SSI tend to be less than $1,000 even some that get SSDI as well as SSI, the families are below the $15,000, in some cases below the $15,000. They have some other subsidies, yeah, but they're still very low income. So even some of the low income units are really, as you're indicating, aren't affordable for those folks. So I guess the question is, how far down do we go to reach that population? And some of the folks you're talking about basically have little or no credit for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So
if you look at the housing alliances, or maybe it was Regional Housing Legal Services, they've done some studies. I know they did one in Allegheny County that shows the need for housing is unbelievably higher for people below 50% of area median income than it is for people at 50% or at 60%.
Yes,
that's
and in
where
fact,
the huge need is.
The Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia did an initial study in 2010 and has updated it 2 or 3 times, affordability and availability of rental housing in Pennsylvania. And they show statewide average, it is different in different communities. There really is no shortage at 50 to 80% of area median income. The tax credit program has worked well, but the shortage for extremely low keeps increasing. And now I just looked at Pittsburgh numbers. I know that there is still a shortage at the 50% level, but it's a much smaller shortage than below. And I'm also thinking, Jeff, the point that Ray just made about owners not aggressively marketing to people with disabilities, maybe there's a way we can connect you. Maybe there's a way we can work on that with PHFA and the owners and Silk and SHDP and others.
Sure, that's something we'd be willing to work on.
Good.
Great. Thanks.
I see we have hit the noon hour, or past it by a minute. Does anybody else have any comments? *7. Then I thank you all for getting on. This has been a great discussion. And a reminder, we will not hold a legislative briefing in August, but keep your eyes on your email. We'll certainly let you know as things happen. And enjoy the rest of the summer. We'll talk to you in September. Bye-bye.
Thank you.